Is Andrew McCabe as stupid as he looks? Is Rosenstein as stupid as he looks? And boy, does he look the part. The 25th Amendment, they said. And they had two cabinet secretaries. These men should be arrested. They tried to topple a duly elected president. The FBI has no role in the 25th Amendment, has no role in enforcing any part of the Constitution. They're supposed to uphold it in their own duties, but they have no role. You may look at the Constitution. You won't find the FBI in the Constitution. In fact, you won't find the Department of Justice in the Constitution. You won't find the position of director or deputy director of the FBI or attorney general in the Constitution. You will find the president. He's the boss of the executive branch. The 25th Amendment. Silent coup. There's a good piece on this that I found at the Constitution Center by Brian Cald and David Posen. 25th Amendment seeks to answer a series of questions raised by the original Constitution's treatment of presidential and vice presidential vacancies and presidential disability. Now, all the sections aren't relevant, so we'll go to the section that is relevant. What happens if the president becomes unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office? Now, what was meant by that? We happen to know. This wasn't 200 and some years ago. It was a relative few years ago, a few decades ago. The concern was if a president is assassinated or a president dies in office, a president becomes disabled in office the way Woodrow Wilson did when his wife was running the presidency for a couple of years, or John Kennedy was assassinated. They wanted to formalize a process. So if a president becomes incapacitated, mentally or physically, what would we do? You had in the case of Eisenhower and Nixon, where Eisenhower set forth what would happen when he had a heart attack, that Nixon would be acting in many respects as the president and so forth. But they wanted a formal process under the Constitution. It had nothing to do with removing a president with whom you disagreed. It even had nothing to do with removing a president who may have committed a criminal act. That's what impeachment's for. It had nothing to do with it. There were no procedures formally in place in the Constitution. The 25th Amendment, Section 1, confirms that when the president is removed from office, dies, or resigns, the vice president becomes president. That's what happened when Nixon resigned in 1974. Gerald Ford stepped in. And when the vice president isn't serving any longer, when Gerald Ford became president of the United States, Congress confirmed the vice president, who was Rockefeller. Nominated Rockefeller, Ford did, to fill the empty vice presidency. This is now part of the 25th Amendment. What about presidential inability? Sections 3 and 4 of the 25th Amendment. Two procedures. Follow this. It's not easy. Two procedures for transferring authority to the vice president as acting president. Section 3 allows the president to transfer authority temporarily by submitting a written declaration that he's unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office. This happens, for instance, when a president goes under surgery. Reagan did it once when he was shot. George W. Bush did it twice when he went under planned surgeries. Section 4 addresses the dramatic case of a president who may be unable to fulfill his constitutional role, who cannot or will not step aside. And what's meant by that is mental or physical impairment. The initial deciding group is the vice president and a majority of either the cabinet or some other body that Congress may designate. Congress has never done that. If this group or the cabinet declares a president unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the vice president immediately becomes acting president. This is what the constitutional illiterate McCabe and the constitutional literate Rosenstein were apparently imagining. if and when the president pronounces himself able, that is, he disagrees with the group or the cabinet, the deciding group has 4 days to disagree with him. And if it does not, the president retakes his powers. But if it does, the vice president keeps control while Congress quickly meets and makes a decision. The voting rule in these contested cases favors the president. Why? The vice president continues as acting president only if 2/3 majorities of both chambers agree the president is unable to serve. Long story short, in order to remove the president in the end, even if everything's rolling along the way McCabe and Rosenstein wanted, you would need 2/3 of both houses of Congress. That was never going to happen. To impeach a president in the House, you only need a majority. Now, isn't it interesting, ladies and gentlemen, that subsequent to this, even a year after this, or 6 or 8, 10 months after this silent coup, that stories in the media began appearing. They found some Yale professor, remember? Who said the president was psychologically unfit, that he was a danger. Remember this? And she was joined by a couple dozen others. And they met with Democrats on Capitol Hill. Isn't that interesting? FBI pushes this. Media pushes this. Democrats push this. You don't hear about it anymore, do you? But remember when you did? Remember when the repeatedly stupid Joe Scarborough and his sidekick, Mika Brzezinski, kept bringing it up? Even though it's an impossibility? Even though it has nothing to do with what McCabe and Rosenstein were really focused on? And the other thing, ladies and gentlemen, is this. Prior to the president firing Comey, they were already spying on him and his administration. They had spies in the campaign. Remember that? They already had a FISA warrant in late October. Remember that? It had already been extended. Remember that? They were already pushing the dossier. Christopher Steele, Orr's wife, to top members of the FBI, including Strzok and Page and Mr. Weissman. This was the insurance policy I believe that they were talking about. We have an insurance policy. What would that be? The 25th Amendment. Even though they're too stupid to understand that that would never work, still, we got the 25th Amendment. And months later, they would gin up support in their Praetorian Guard media. They would gin up support in academia. They would gin up support in the Democrat Party on Capitol Hill as the cabal got bigger and bigger to try and force this president out of office. This was a direct assault on your Constitution. This was a direct assault on your enfranchisement. This was a direct assault on the President of the United States. We have never experienced anything like this in the United States, which is why 2 damn years ago, I was trying to ring the bell and call it out. And boy, you should have seen, and many of you did, how the media pounced. Oh, right-wing conspiracy theorist. I've never been, and I am not a right-wing conspiracy. Oh, so my citing news articles, my citing news reports, them, and putting it together, made me a right-wing conspiracy theorist when many of them already knew what was taking place because it had been leaked to them. We'll be right back.
Mark Levin.